We're kicking off the first session with an unfiltered look at what really happens when contractors implement CMMC. CMMC Confessions, Real Stories from the Trenches, brings together three CyberSheath experts: Rich Barron, VP of Service Delivery, Zach Curley, Compliance Analyst, and Andrew Zoppi, Director of Compliance, in a candid discussion moderated by CyberSheath founder Eric Noonan. They'll pull back the curtain on real client experiences, sharing the unexpected roadblocks, common misconceptions, and critical lessons learned during CMMC implementations. You'll get insights on foundational challenges, process hurdles, team communication strategies, and proven approaches that lead to successful certification. With assessments underway and CMMC requirements coming, this is your chance to see what's really involved and to learn strategies to avoid costly delays and keep your certification on track. Get ready for a session packed with actionable insights from the trenches.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Noonan, founder of CyberSheath, and I'm thrilled to be here, joined by Rich Barron, Zach Curley, and Andrew Zoppi, really who are at the tip of the spear relative to CMMC compliance and have been for a very long time. So we thought it would be great to get everyone together and share their expertise and their experience. And I'm really going to just try and stay out of the way here while they share with you what it's been like on the front lines if they've taken customers from initial assessment through SPRS scoring all the way through implementation of the people, processes, and technologies required through full C3PAO audit. Now, prior to that, they've been through DCMA audits, prime audits, every kind of audit imaginable. So they really have an incredible amount of experience. So guys, thanks for joining me today. I think this is going to be wonderful for the audience, and we're thrilled to be kind of sharing this content with everybody. Let's jump right in because there's a lot I want to get to. Starting with, I'd love to hear, because you've been through so many audits, some of them with the long lead time, some of them with the short lead time. You've kind of, you've seen it all. What's one of the most surprising challenges you've encountered during a CMMC engagement? Maybe, Andrew, we could start with you and just tell me what's something that surprised you during one of your engagements?
Yeah, I mean, every engagement, every CMMC audit comes with its own type of challenges. And it's always a little bit of an adventure. It's a framework that's been around for a while, but not really been tested. So a lot of things we like to call it is an interpretive risk. So auditors are new to the space, new to CMMC framework, and they are going through the controls. And sometimes they bring in historical frameworks that they've used in the past, like NIST 853, which is basically the parent to 800-171. And some of the requirements are a little bit different, or the way the expectations in some of those more DoD classified spaces are different. So navigating those conversations with an auditor, pulling them back from overinterpretation, and then helping them understand how we are meeting that NIST 800-171 requirement is generally the most surprising challenge for me that I've seen across several audits. But it's getting better, as the industry continues going through these audits, as the industry continues to adopt this framework, we are starting to see, auditors be more trained and more of an understanding of the framework. And I'll leave it there for right now.
I think that's a great point, Andrew, because where we are relative to kind of the life cycle of CMMC compliance and actual C3PAO audits, it's early days. And so I imagine auditors are very different from an engagement to engagement. I would imagine, Rich, for you, running kind of the delivery and operational side and often having a team that has to provide the artifacts to Zach and Andrew, I imagine you've seen some different kinds of surprises.
Yeah, different types of surprises, just because, when you're going through from like an operation and engineering perspective, to Andrew's points of, how kind of no two auditors are created the same, no two environments are created the same either. So you're going to have different types of technologies, there's countless vendors for firewalls, for security tooling, et cetera. So being able to then from an engineering and artifact collection aspect, be able to interpret that, in tandem with our compliance function to make sure that, okay, when we're actually going and collecting, hey, this is what is going to meet this control, and then it actually gets us over to the finish line successfully.
Yeah, at the end of the day, having the evidence, having the artifact, I would imagine, is a great way to pull the conversation back into the actual requirements of NIST 800-171 versus getting it to 853 or some other either framework or interpretation. And Zach, when I think about preparedness, when a client thinks they're ready, I know you've had some experiences you've had some really tight timelines, and it's like we're going. But is there a moment or something you could share, Zach, where a client thought they were ready, but clearly they weren't? What happened, and how did you deal with that situation?
Sure, actually, quite a few times. We had a recent example where we had one of our customers come and say, "Look, we have our C3PO going. We're booked. We're ready." And I had a highlight conversation. I'm like, "When did you, A, when is it booked? How much time do we have? And B, how deep a dive have you done?" Like, "Oh, well, we walked through the whole framework. We know these controls." I'm like, "But are you aware of the assessment objectives that support them?" A lot of organizations tend to look at that top level control and say, "Okay, cool. We've met this one sentence. We're good to go," not realizing there's the define document, all the fun underlying things that underpin everything that CMMC is looking for. And we had to have that honest conversation of, look, you have a month out from your pre-assessment. You are not ready. You do not have enough of these pieces together. You have no documentation. Ooh, may be possible. In this case, they were thankfully able to talk to their auditor and have that moved out. But that definitely comes up a fair bit of, hey, we think we're good to go. We gave ourselves a 110, a year and a half ago, so we should be good, right?
I think that's a great point, and it's one of the things I love so much about, frankly, this team and CyberSheath generally is that the ability to have those kind of honest conversations, the idea that, look, we'll walk through a wall for you. We're a service provider. We're going to get the job done. But look, let's have an honest conversation. Is this mountain too high to climb? And I know what I love again about the culture and kind of the delivery that happens in this company is there's a rallying of like missionaries who just kind of make it happen. And but it's wonderful when you can kind of pump the brakes and say, hey, let's get the auditor, let's get all the smart people in the room, and let's just kind of get a plan to succeed and see if we can avoid this emergency. You obviously can't always do that. Andrew, what's something, speaking of kind of avoiding emergencies, what's something you wish every organization knew before they started their CMMC journey?
Yeah, this is a great question. I love this question because it's something that we've witnessed and go through a lot. A lot of people, when they first start this, they look for what is an SSP, and then they go to the NIST and they get the template. And just to continue to going on Zach's point there, they only right to the controls to the high level. Yeah, we meet this high level, but they don't take into account the assessment objectives. And so they have this SSP that they can talk about the controls at a high level, but they don't talk about how they're meeting it per assessment objective. So really going through, and I wish every client had an SSP that was based on the assessment objective level. That way they know at every point, every objective, how they are meeting the control, and then they have more of an honest feedback of, okay, we thought we were fully implementing this control, but when we get to objective D, we realize it's not defined in the appropriate place. We actually don't call it out correctly. And that right there would solve a lot of the documentation issues, the maturity, just being able to understand what each objective is talking about, not the high level control, because that's pretty straightforward, but each objective adds in a more nuance to the control.
Yeah, that makes me think, Andrew, about one quick wins, and I'm going to ask Rich about that here in a second. But it also makes me think that the earlier that you get engaged with whoever your partner is going to be, whether it's an internal partner that's going to, an IT and security department that's going to deliver CMMC for you and with you, or it's a managed service provider like CyberSheath that's going to solve the whole problem for you and with you, the earlier you get engaged, the better, because if you're taking an SSP that's not even close to meeting all the objectives and you're kind of basing your program and your implementation around that, it may be kind of mission impossible and you may have to start over. So I think that's a great point. And it reminds me of the successes we've had I would suggest that the folks who've engaged earliest have a more frictionless process. But it makes me think about quick wins too, Rich. So what's a quick win that you've seen, from your perch, which has made a big difference in compliance readiness?
Yeah, a couple of things. I'd say the biggest one above all is, like kind of just going back to like the last question of like, things I wish every organization would know is like, okay, what's the scope of your CUI environment? Do you have a clear understanding of where your CUI is, how it's labeled, how does it flow in and out of the organization? And usually those magic questions don't have the best answers. So quick wins there are engaging with folks like sometimes even completely outside of the IT picture, like folks in like a contracts office, even sales teams to find those flow downs. Those then help us, both from even from a technology side, like, hey, let's go find this team. They might have a file share, they might have something, or even at a higher level up with like a project manager or someone who's at least taking ownership of that contract to then better understand how is this working inside of the business. So then we can determine, hey, is there CUI here, and then we can start, the technical and the compliance driven outcomes. But those I've seen both sides of this play out where it's like, hey, we're not sure and we're hoping that it's a no, and then we go through it, we've confirmed yes, it's a no, or we're hoping it's a no, but then it actually becomes a yes. There still is that just immediate sense of clarity that comes out at the conclusion there, because it's like, okay, I've got my mission now. I know what I need to do.
Yeah, it kind of highlights again the idea of starting and doing the work early with the service provider or an internal team, because you want to find those things out on your own well ahead of your audit versus during an audit. What about you, Zach? What's a quick win that you've seen that's made a big difference in compliance readiness, given that you've been kind of, again, at the tip of the spear with so many of our customers, getting them through full compliance?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing is kind of, as Rich said, is getting a real diverse group of stakeholders, not just talking to IT or security. A lot of companies view CMMC as an IT problem a lot of the time, and they'll only worry about, okay, are we FIPS validated? Do we have a network diagram? Not necessarily processing that CMMC is really, for most businesses, a whole of business approach. It doesn't just stop at the computer. It's everything that you're doing. So quick wins are really getting that buy-in and that understanding laid out, and having customers understand, hey, this is not just going to be a, check this configuration, you're set. This is going to be and it's kind of intended by the government, a cultural shift about protecting the data at every level, at every position that you have it, where you get it from, where you put it, how you use it, etc. So yeah, quick wins usually come from establishing that early and then getting that understanding and buy-in. So you do catch those little pieces, and you don't have it turns out, this team, three people removed, does actually have, who knows, a Dropbox that they share things out of, because they have a specific customer that has a specific need that was established, a decade ago, that no one remembers.
Yeah, boy, I'm sure that's relating to so many people in the audience right now. They're like, oh, we have that. That's such a great point, because we've seen so many, we've been doing this now for 13 years, long before the government started calling it CMMC. And we've seen so many customers that come in, and it's the FSO, the facility security officer, and it's like, I'm on the hook for CMMC. Well, you can't be the only person, and we have to help that person kind of corral and get more buy-in from the rest of the company. Or as you said, Zach, it's an IT thing. The IT team's going to solve it. Well, the IT team, are they going to do the HR piece and the background checks and the physical security? Like, it's so broad. And so establishing those stakeholders and making sure everybody's bought into the mission, I couldn't agree more. It's a great point. And so I appreciate that, the kind of experience and perspective view that you've all shared. But I want to move a little bit to now kind of process and implementation. And some of the things you said, Zach, remind me of just misconceptions. And so maybe if we start with Andrew, what's one of the most common misconceptions that clients have about implementing NIST 800-171 or CMMC controls?
Yeah, there's a lot here. So this is going to be a loaded response here. So a lot of clients come to us early on, and like Rich was saying, they don't have a good idea of the scoping. They don't have a good idea of what's in their environment, what needs to be protected, where their use cases actually are. There's a big disconnect between the people working on the contracts and then the IT implementing the controls. Then the other aspect of this is this is a very marketing kind of ploy right now to get a lot of people to, hey, sign up with us and we'll get you certified. It's a quick fix. It's maybe, you know, some of those file share platforms that are out there that say, hey, we can get you CMMC ready. But then you go get there, there's no documentation. You might have a place that's suitable, but it's not configured all the way. And you start using that space, you start using these things that don't really fit your workflow. And then once we get into the environment and we start seeing, you know, what's going on and we start assessing and scoping the environment, the CUI isn't even being used for the tool set that they bought. And so now we have a really muddied water of where CUI is, what your actual workflow is. And it's not just a flip the bits, you know, let's turn on MFA and we'll be compliant. It's turn on MFA, then let's talk about the process on how we're interacting with the CUI and with the data sets that are regulated that we need to protect. So a lot of the misconceptions come in is like, this will be easy. And it's not. It's not just let's flip the bits. Let's just document this in a quick SSP that we downloaded off of the NIST website. It's a process. It's going through your entire workflow. It's seeing how your CUI is coming in, tracking what systems are being used, what is needed to do the job, how many steps are in your job, whether you're manufacturing or in constructions or staff augmentation. You have a workflow. That workflow is really important to understand, so we can create a CUI flow diagram. And it's a process. It just takes time. It's not something that can be built in a day. And there's a lot of this misconception of, hey, I bought this service, I should be compliant already. But there's this back end of the maturity aspect that wouldn't get you there by just flipping and opening that wallet and buying a random service that says they will get you there.
It's an amazing explanation, Andrew. I appreciate that because, you know, I spend a lot of time talking to prospects before they become customers, I guess, and doing a lot of our work is just kind of educational. We hope to be the right fit. Maybe we're not, but let's talk about what you're doing today. And I feel like price drives the misconception so often because some of those kind of file sharing solutions are pretty low price. And it's kind of like, you know, it's like 6-minute abs. It's like, I want to believe that. I'd love that. It'd be great if I could get 6-minute abs. Let's do that. But you know, deep down, you probably can't do that. You have to change your diet. You have to exercise. There's a lot of things you have to do. And I feel like that's the difference between solving the whole problem. There is a kind of set of resources and some pain that you have to go through and process for sure that you have to go through versus well, I'm going to swipe my credit card and I'll get this thing and I'll get this widget. I'll flip the bit, as you said, and I'll be compliant. It's just, you know, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Not it probably is. It definitely is. So you said a lot that kind of resonated with me for sure. And I think there's an appropriate point solution for some of those or use case for some of those solutions. But more and more we find that folks are disillusioned. Like, I bought this widget. I thought it got me there. Turns out it doesn't help. What would you say, Zach, you know, and that gets into kind of control areas a little bit in terms of access control, incident response, like those shared file kind of solutions. They don't touch incident response. They don't touch, you know, 24/7 logging, et cetera. There's so much there. What are some control areas, Zach, that you think clients struggle with the most, and then why?
Sure. Actually, kind of funny, the biggest one consistently is always the configuration management component, because a lot of organizations have, you know, they'll have some way they provision a computer, but it's almost never documented or regulated enough to actually meet all of CMMC control requirements, specifically around documentation for one of, have you defined what is an essential service? Have you defined what's an essential function? A lot of times customers may not even understand what words we're using. The amount of times I have to explain, what do we mean when we say what are your essential protocols? What are your essential, you know, what have yous, is fairly frequent. But then trying to establish that, okay, well, we didn't really have a baseline. We have all these computers that, you know, we have our standard Office, Adobe, but then, you know, Joe over there has this software and Judy over there has something completely different. And it's, well, do they need it? Is that part of their function? Do you know what their function is? Have you defined the function? And sometimes it's a lot of, you know, unraveling a yarn ball of, all right, let's start from where we are now. How do we get here? What does this computer have on it? What does it need? Let's kind of take a few steps back, undo some things, and then start saying the groundwork of, okay, let's document it, figure out what we need. How are we going to enforce it? You know, does this break anything else? Do we have any other workflows that we don't know about where if we turn off this service or this protocol, that now suddenly a manufacturing thing goes down because it was vital to an OT technology that no one knew about, so configuration management has definitely been the most consistently painful because it requires generally a lot of undoing before we can move forward towards a compliant setup, really.
Yeah, it's such a kind of nuanced area and a great answer, Zach, because what I thought of as you were answering that is you really need, on your team to get fully kind of CMMC compliant. Again, whether you're using internal resources or an external service provider, you really need somebody who's going to go find out, right? Like go find out, why do they need the software? Where did they get the software? Who makes the software? Is it approved? Is it documented? All those things. And if someone's just going to hand you a checklist of questions you can go ask, well, I guess that's great if you don't have a day job. And as you said, you know all the terminology and you know what NIST means. But like, let's face it, most customers don't because they're doing important things for the warfighter. And if they had time to do this and the resources, they would have already done it. So I think the idea that finding a partner, internal or external, who's going to go find out and do the work for you and with you, so critical. And you brought up time, right? And so how long things can take. And so, Rich, you see this, I think, a lot with kind of implementation and all the core technology. So I'd love to hear from you either what part of the process or what controls tend to take the longest and take longer than clients expect.
Yeah, if I were to kind of think of just one, and it's kind of a category, I guess, this would be, I think about we're in the remediation phase, so we're burning down items out of a POAM. And this would be, I'd say we're like the category that often gets held up is remediations to on-premise infrastructure. But those that require like major network or infrastructure overhauls, I can think of a couple of examples off the top of my head. I had a customer whose wired network was so bad in their building, the only way to fix it was call an electrician and they rewired the whole building. And it was because they were actually getting dinged in areas like physical security because they couldn't actually appropriately secure their network racks. Instead, they were in like janitor closets because that's where it made sense. So it's like, oh, well, we can't take away the janitor closet but on the flip side, we also can't secure the network and the server that also sit in the janitor closet. So as they go through these motions, like those, it's things outside of your control that usually then just add on to the delay. We've got to go get the materials, we need labor, someone actually has to go run all the cables, and then IT comes in, there's new equipment that gets set up, then we do a cutover, we make sure everything works, it gets redocumented then by the compliance team, we collect new artifacts, and kind of rinse and repeat. And obviously that's a bit of a nuclear example, but anything from that down to like, hey, we might have to switch out equipment, maybe a firewall. The one you have today is end of life. We've got to get you something that's compliant for tomorrow and to check the box on the objective.
So critical, Rich, because I think there's so much, as you said, it's kind of a nuclear example, but on the spectrum, there's nuclear, there's minor, and there's everything in between, which is why I think you really need partners, internal or external, who's going to say kind of, yes, no, what's the question? Like, let's go figure this out. And I think the most successful customers I've seen are the ones who want CMMC implemented on top of their existing business versus the idea that you're going to take the existing manufacturing business, tool and die maker, architecture and design firm and say, we're actually going to migrate your entire business to the cloud and that's how it's going to run. And you can't print anymore and you can't. Like, that's crazy. And that is not what the Department of Defense intended. But we hear it a lot for customers. Like, I understand I can't print anymore. I understand I have to move to GCC high and I have to move everything to the cloud. And of course, that's not true. And so you need a partner who's going to work through the nuclear option and the minor options and figure out how to make CMMC fit on top of your business. And it's totally possible. We've been through many, many, many successful audits with our customers and can demonstrate that across kind of every vertical within the defense industrial base. There is a solution, there is a way. But along the way, I imagine there's many mistakes you can make, Andrew. And so what's a mistake that you've seen more than once that's completely avoidable?
Yeah, this is something, I mean, you brought up a great point, and I just want to stay on the previous thought for a minute, and then I'll go into some of that, what is avoidable. A lot of people come to us after they've read a lot. They've read a lot on the internet. There's a lot of bad information on the internet. They've met with other providers and they were like, yes, like you said, we're manufacturing. We have to have the schematic with us with the tool set as it goes through the shop floor for route enforcement. But now we're told we can't print. And so now there's all these extra steps and now our manufacturing is backlogged and they come to us looking for a solution. Look, and I really like, looking at houses and stuff like that. So whenever you're designing a house, if a plumber was to tell you, hey, you can't put the sink where you want it, you would find a new plumber, because if you're building a house, you want it to be what you want. Same with CMMC, it's no different. We're building you a house to operate efficiently, effectively, and securely, because we have to protect that data set. So when I start going through this, I start looking at the misconceptions, and those are generally what creates the mistake. The client thought they were doing something good, and it was good, but it was the wrong approach for that business and that use case. So then it was completely disregarded by the end user. And so if you build a beautiful house but no one's living in it, what's the point of the beautiful house? So the way to do it is we go through, we see exactly, we kind of boil it back, see exactly what the use cases are, and then get people into the right house, the right environment, right way to get your data sets protected. So generally that increases our timeline, right? So now we have to peel back the onion and then restart almost from scratch to get it so it fits the workplace, fits the environment, fits the way that you are interacting with the CUI. Whether you are manufacturing, flywheels, or if you are doing staff augmentation, your workflow, whatever we do, whatever we implement, however we do the controls, which is side of the house for implementation from the technical piece, whatever we do, it has to fit the way you're doing business so that you can be most effective as possible, while also still protecting that CUI data sets. So, what's mostly avoidable is just trying to get past those misconceptions. People are often given a lot of bad information. There's still some blog posts I see out there where CMMC has 5 levels. We haven't had 5 levels in forever. So just getting with an internal or external partner to, give you the truth behind what you need to do, I think goes a long way when avoiding some of these mistakes.
Yeah, when you talk about the house analogy and where you want to put the sink and use cases are so important. Like, how does your business work? And by the way, like, let's have that conversation. And I've heard like, well, you have to have your use cases documented. Well, that'd be great. That'd be great if businesses took the time to do that. My experience is almost none do. So we have to do it with them and as part of the onboarding process, because they know the use cases, they live them every day. But have they taken the time to document them? Of course not. They're running a business. So working with them to document that, so then we can see, as you said, Andrew, how the CUI flows through the system, how does it need to work, what are the components, the whole system design, document it, and then layer the controls on top of that use case is the way to do it, versus saying, hey, take your existing business and you got to fit in this box. And it reminds me of kind of where security was 20 years ago. Like, the answer to everything was no. You can't have a camera on your phone. You can't use USB drives. You can't, well, okay, at some point, to your point, we'd like to live in this beautiful house. So it's a great point. I appreciate that perspective a lot. And I think you need a partner who's going to spend time with you, understanding your use cases, documenting them for you, because again, if you had the time, you would have already done it, and then implementing the controls in a way that doesn't break your business, because it's totally possible. So Zach, what about you? Is there a mistake that you've seen more than once that's completely avoidable that you'd love to share with the audience to kind of help give them a leg up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some great conversation, and it's definitely true that there is no one size fit all. You can meet CMMC where you are with what you have. It just takes effort and intention. A big misconception that is quite common and also incredibly easy to avoid is mismatches in either documentation or configuration. Some customers are now aware that, okay, we need policies, we need a system security plan. We'll answer this question: what have we set for our password complexity? How many characters do we require? What do we actually have set up? And then we'll look at the artifacts and we'll say, your policy says this. I can see clearly in this configuration it's different, either higher or lower. That it happens. Maybe you wrote it before you looked at it, or after looking at it, you realize, hey, we do need to change this. We had it at 6 before. We wanted it to be better. So we wrote the system security plan. We said 6. We knew it was 6. And then after discussion, we changed it to 14, and then forgot to go back and update the document. So definitely ensuring that whatever you've listed, whatever you've written down, whatever you stated you're doing, wherever possible, is as accurate as you can make it. If you can go look at a configuration, go look at it. It takes a few minutes, but it's worth it because it's a very low hanging fruit that the auditors are going to look for. It's very easy to check for them, but it's also easy to check for you. So ensuring that what you state you're doing is accurate is very important.
Yeah, I love the idea of that because it's a question I frequently get is, well, will you give us templates? Like, why don't you just sell us templates and we'll take the templates and templates are great and they're a good place to start from, clearly, but they have to be, when you're done with that template and making it look like how you actually implement the controls, it doesn't look like a template anymore. It looks like your SSP, your incident response plan, your vulnerability management plan. So there's a lot of tailoring, and to your point, Zach, it has to happen because you don't want any daylight between what you're actually doing and what your documentation says you're doing. And so it's a great example of a mistake that can be avoided. So I think we've spent a good amount of time on process and implementation, and I appreciate that conversation. It makes me think, though, one of the other things that is less understood or less talked about is the kind of communication and mindset that has to come with ultimately CMMC compliance. And so communication, whether it's from doing a mail migration, whether it's onboarding, whether it's letting users know about annual training, like there's so many touch points relative to communication. But is there, just thinking globally about communications, Rich, have you had a moment where you had to kind of break bad news to a customer relative to their ability to get compliance on a timeline, or they had an incident or any kind of time where you had to kind of communicate bad news? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's, I've usually, when it's one example comes to mind, I've met some just phenomenally amazing technical teams through our clients over the years. And oftentimes these folks are, they're passionate about some of the best and brightest cloud technologies and platforms, that are out there, and they use them and implement them in their business. They made significant investment to do it. But as we, go through the our own internal assessments and getting them into a CMMC readiness campaign, we might uncover that maybe one of these platforms or technologies just is not compliant and won't be compliant. Storing CUI in non-FedRAMP platforms who might be administered offshore, data's not being stored at rest in the United States. So that does wander you into an uncomfortable discussion around like, hey, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to continue to go this way. But hey, good news, just through the years of this, like we've successfully re-architected and executed a number of different levels of private cloud migrations into FedRAMP platforms. You mentioned email migrations before too, like folks that also just might be like, hey, I like my on-premise Exchange environment. I don't really want to pay Microsoft a lot of money for Office 365 GCC High, but unfortunately I use a third-party spam filtering service and they'll never be compliant. So like it still becomes like, okay, we still have to do something here. How can we meet you where you are, get you successfully over that hurdle, and then back into the green with compliance?
Yeah, it reminds me actually, the inverse of the question in terms of breaking bad news. I've been in many, many, many conversations where we've broken good news. That's not true. You can use that technology. Actually, you are able to print, just so it can kind of go both ways. But I think it's so important. It kind of goes back to the use case too, understanding how the business works. You need a provider who is going to dig in and understand how your business works. What are your use cases? So that if it is bad news and you have a vendor that you're storing CUI, they're never going to become FedRAMP compliant. Well, let's solve that, right? It has to be solved. Let's figure it out. And one of the things that I think you can get really deep in some of these discussions, and I'd love to hear from Zach and Andrew on this one. It can be overwhelming for a customer, very much so, right? I mean, there's a technical aspect, there's a process aspect, there's a documentation aspect. Sometimes when I think IT, security, compliance are all converging together, it can be like trying to learn three languages simultaneously. And maybe for some customers, languages they never wanted to learn in the first place. So it can be very overwhelming. How do you work with customers? We'll start with Zach, to help them stay motivated and understand CMMC in a way that's useful and not overwhelming?
Sure, absolutely. I think kind of tying back to some of the conversation we had about misconceptions is people do have those ingrained beliefs of, oh, this is going to be difficult, this is going to break our business, we're going to have to take away everything we do, we're not going to be able to operate as we have been. So the first thing is laying the groundwork of understanding, look, this is designed, these controls are fairly open-ended. We have a lot of flexibility with how we go about meeting something, and the way we do it for one customer won't be the same way we do it for another. So helping them understand that this is not a do or die, or we have to do everything exactly as written, or we're in trouble. Helping them see that we have flexibility. We can understand their workflow, their use cases, and build a program that works for them. But then also taking it one control at a time. People see that huge assessment guide. They see those 110 controls, and they say, "How am I going to get there? We're a team of 20 people. We manufacture widgets. How am I supposed to handle this?" And helping them understand, look, one control at a time, one assessment objective at a time, build it, piece by piece, get a program that works with your business, aligned to what you do. And this will flow. I mean, once you've got it set up, this is going to work. It will keep working because it's been designed intentionally to fit what you do. We're not going to force you to do something crazy. We're going to find the thing that works best for you and that flows with the way you do business.
Yeah, it's why you need a partner, again, internal or external, who's just embedded with your business, not coming in, kind of checking some boxes, giving you a bunch of work, and then I'll check back up on you in a month. Your partner really understands the business, or needs to understand the business, to kind of help it not be overwhelming. What about you, Andrew? You're so embedded with so many customers. You've been through so many of these audits for so long. How do you help customers, kind of stay motivated and eat CMMC one bite at a time?
Yeah, so it normally comes in like a wave. So everyone goes through moments of like this where they're overwhelmed when they first onboard with us. Generally, they come in and they believe they're doing great. They might be self-reporting at 110, and then we have to have a hard conversation. You're not 110. We did a gap assessment, and now we've identified the pitfalls here. A lot of things like Rich was saying, you're not, you have a cloud service provider that's not FedRAMP. You have these tool sets that you're using that are not in the right environment. And so what we tend to do is we meet together and we develop a plan, right? So you have the plan of actions and milestones, which is a requirement that you have to meet. But once we're done with that gap, we have this POAM, and we start showing, okay, we come with the solutions, the options. A lot of times, hey, you have all these problems. Okay, what now? I don't, but if you come with solutions, people aren't as overwhelmed. They're like, okay, all right, this can be done. We have solutions. There's a lot of problems, but we also have a lot of opportunities here. Instead of looking at it as, oh no, I'll never be able to get compliant because now I don't know what to do with this POAM, we tend to go through and give everyone an option, that you can meet these controls these ways. Let's look through your use cases again. Let's go through this remediation phase and let's figure it out step by step. And if it doesn't work, let's try something in a test group. If it doesn't work, let's reiterate. And it's not going to be as overwhelming as it seems if we take it one bite at a time. A lot of times we see people, they look at the list, they come and, hey, we had a third party or someone else looked at this and we have all these problems and we don't know how to fix it. Coming with the solution, I think, kind of gets rid of a lot of that overwhelmed feeling. You have a plan now. It's a lot easier to take a mountain if you know the path you're going to take. So that's just my take on that.
No, it's a wonderful point, because I think because of the breadth of this group's experience and the teams that work with and for you, you've probably seen the solution somewhere else or something very close to it. And showing up, I think it's a great point, showing up a solution versus just pointing out you're not FedRAMP compliant, you're not 24/7 monitoring, you're handling ITAR, you're not in GCC high. Like, that's great. Thank you. I knew that. I knew that I wasn't fully compliant. I hired you to help me get there. So it's a great point. And digging in, and I know kind of the spirit of the teams here, digging in and like, yes, now what's your question? We'll figure this out. And not letting up until we do is kind of, part of the magic, I think, of the way you guys all work. Rich, what's an aha moment where you've seen where a client understood CMMC and saw value in it? I like the idea of CMMC because in my entire cybersecurity career, from my perspective, it's one of the most useful and practical frameworks I've seen because it's things that actually improve security, whole disk encryption, monitoring your network 24/7, having an incident response plan, like the multi-factor authentication. Like this is really the blocking and tackling of cybersecurity. And so, but I've been doing this for a minute, so it's easy for me to understand that. For customers who are running a manufacturing business, an architecture and design firm, an educational institution, whoever it is, what's an example of when you've seen a client like had a moment where they're like, "Oh, I get this. This makes sense."
Yeah, yeah, good example. I had a customer that probably it was about 6 months into their engagement with us, and we had gone through a couple of different remediations. So they started at a fairly low score. You mentioned disk encryption. They didn't have that. They didn't have multi-factor authentication at the desktop level, protecting protecting the console. They didn't have an EDR, enhanced detect response, endpoint detect response platform that's actually monitoring, the processes, services, et cetera, any virus activity on the device. And they, I think it was a COO was in the airport and left his laptop in the bin at TSA at the checkpoint. So got a phone call from, I think the VP of IT, and is like, what do we do? Well, it's like, well, good news. Like we were able to confirm you can isolate the device with the EDR. We've confirmed that it's encrypted. And we've confirmed that the desktop MFA is active, it's in place, and it fails closed. So, number of defense in depth, measures that otherwise 6 months before would have been, hey, yeah, somebody could have taken the hard drive out of this thing and taken the data from your COO if they were acting nefariously. So it was it really just changed the mood of the situation, where it could have been a much worse conversation that we had to walk into versus hey, yeah, not great. Let's still, we'll follow our processes, ultimately did successfully recover the device, but, there's still a lot less risk, in that outcome.
Yeah, it's a great story and a great example because one of the things I appreciate about CMMC, having been a chief information security officer, is the idea that it's such a win because all businesses understand compliance. They may not understand the bits and bytes of CMMC and implementation, and they don't need to. At the kind of leadership level, the idea of like, we need to be compliant, they get that. They have that in every part of their business: human resources, engineering, legal, finance, etc. The business understands compliance. So it gives you a great way to have that conversation. But then also, because this framework has so much value, you can have the wins like you just described, where you get actual security as well, and things that actually do make you more secure. So I appreciate that example. So we've talked a little bit here about communication and mindset. I want to be mindful of time and move on to kind of the final section that I wanted to cover around lessons and takeaways relative to CMMC compliance and what you are seeing here on the front lines. And so maybe, Zach, we'll start with you. What's one real success that stands out to you in your experience working with clients to get them to full compliance, and what made it a success?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think there's one real obvious use case, or one example for me is one of those customers who did have an expectation that they were prepared and ready, had locked in with an audit. We were under the gun; they were not moving it. During our work, we found many gaps, many things that were inconsistent, things that they swore up and down were not possible. They couldn't print; it would never happen. And then during testing, we found out, hey, actually, we could if we wanted to. Everyone told us up and down it would never happen. IT, security, everybody. Testing, exploring, found out that's not quite true. But thankfully, as Andrew noted, we come with solutions. We've seen a lot from both what we do here and from past clients, past experiences. So being able to rely on those services, those skills, the solutions that we've cultivated, and even with an incredibly tight timeline, with limited control, limited ability to change things on the fly, still able to pull that out into a full 110, no POAM, no fail items in the audit in 6 weeks. I think our usual lead time is, we usually spend about 6 weeks just getting to know the customer and getting everything put together. So going from hey, thanks for signing with us. Oh, we have 6 weeks to do this, and actually being able to get that across the finish line was pretty great.
Yeah, and amazing. Haven't seen that up close, and that was an amazing kind of delivery of success. And it again makes the point: the earlier you start, the better you are, the less friction in the process. What about you, Andrew? What's a success story that stands out to you, and why? Why was it a success story?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with the low hanging fruit here of just successful audits, because getting people through successful audits is always it's always it's so fulfilling for me just to see like, hey, where they started to where they end. What makes it most successful, or what made it like the whole process, is the client's engagement, the belief in getting it done, the working hard at it, and putting in their side of the work, making sure they do that culture shift. Um, a lot of companies come in and they might not have a visitor management process in place. So now they have to educate users like, all right, when someone comes into reception, we just can't let them go through the building. They have to sign in here. They go through that training. They make sure they have sit downs with a lot of the stakeholders. And then you start seeing leadership get involved and start creating that culture and letting it roll down into their employees' lives. And it's no longer just a hey, CyberSheath put in the technical configuration, CyberSheath wrote our SSP, and we have all the documentation that says we're doing. We're actually living this now, and it just makes it successful, because when that audit comes, they're going to want to make sure they have the evidence, not only of the technical pieces, but that you're actually doing the components that are outside of IT. So the background screening, the training, the visitor management, the physical protections, like that stuff that you have to be doing. And the only way to do it is to educate the users, because like the users are going to be the main frontline workers that are doing those things. And so having customers change the culture and making sure that they have the evidence to support what they're doing outside of the technical configurations, that's always great to get through that successful assessment, and then getting them certified.
Yeah, I have the great fortune of living this every day and being able to see like CMMC actually does make the defense industrial base more secure. There's no question. It's not about really compliance, of course. That's kind of what leads the conversation. But customers are actually becoming more secure on a day-to-day basis, kind of hour by hour, minute by minute, second by second. That is super, super gratifying. Rich, if you could give somebody, the CMMC lead at a small business, one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice, it would be, kind of back to what I mentioned earlier, like understanding your contracts, finding those flow downs, and then start to interview stakeholders on those contracts. Begin to understand how CUI flows or how it originates, specifically, or not even specifically, whether or not it's physical or digital. Sometimes the physical aspect sometimes can be thought about later on, versus digital is where everybody starts from an IT perspective. So, but that would be my one piece of advice.
I'd love to hear from everyone on this particular question, because you just have so much experience. It's unmatched in the industry, really. So, Zach, how about you? One piece of advice.
Sure. I mean, aside from what Rich just covered, making sure you understand your business. Actually, not just don't worry even about CMMC at the start. What do you do? What are you doing? What is your business? What are you in the business of doing? That's one thing I always like to start conversation out with my customers of, tell me in your own words, what does your company do? What are you here for? I can read your marketing, I can read your website. You tell me what is it that you do? Understanding that will really set the framework and the foundation for what you do to meet the compliance, the security. Again, some of these are kind of checkbox of, okay, let's make sure we get BitLocker enabled, File Vault if you have Mac, what have you. Those are going to be kind of default solutions in general that just work for everybody. But when you get into those more complex questions, how are we going to manage visitors? Who are our visitors? Do we have visitors? Do people come to what are we doing? Who are we? What is our business? Having that understanding will make your life a lot easier building out CMMC controls. Again, whether you're doing it yourself or you have a partner, making sure you know what you do is vital to being able to be successful long-term with CMMC and just as a business in general for security and IT.
Yeah, very much ties to the idea of use cases, kind of, and having those up front, because you need to understand the business. What about you, Andrew? What is one piece of advice you would give to the individual responsible for CMMC at a small business? What would you say?
Yeah, I'm just going to keep following a line with everybody, what they've said so far. And the theme that you're getting from us is it's scoping. It's understanding your environment, right? Like if you're going to get a fence built, you're going to get your property line you're going to get it surveyed and know what your property boundary is, and then you're going to put a fence up. How can we do that for the CMMC data that's regulated that we need to protect if we don't know what your boundaries are? And so, like what you'll start hearing and what you've probably heard throughout this entire talk so far is, hey, scoping, use cases, understanding how your environment, how you operate, how do you want to live within your boundary, and understanding that, then you can make a game plan. You can't make a game plan without understanding the boundary. The boundary comes first, and then we will put up the fence and we will put up whatever we need to make it work, but we have to understand the boundary, and so we can operate within that parameter.
Yeah, it kind of really is a great way to kind of bring this to a close, because understanding that is just fundamental, which ties into what we said earlier about the earlier you get engaged with the internal team or an external team that's going to be helping you through compliance, the better. The earlier you understand your use cases and you document those, the better. And then it helps you create kind of a project plan so you don't get overwhelmed with CMMC. And so I think those lessons and takeaways are amazing. I really appreciate Andrew, Zach, and Rich giving us your time today. These guys are amazing. The teams under them are amazing. I think they've been through more actual assessments and more important than that, actual implementations, like owning the problem, solving the whole problem. These guys are available if you have any questions. I can't thank the three of you enough. And I hope what we did today is help the audience get further along in their journey to CMMC compliance. You gave us your most valuable resource, which is your time, and I hope we used it well. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Zach. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Rich. I appreciate your time today.
Huge thanks to Eric, Rich, Zach, and Andrew for sharing their firsthand insights, the challenges, the lessons, and the strategies that can make or break a CMMC journey. Take these real-world experiences back to your teams and use them to anticipate roadblocks, streamline your processes, and stay on track for successful certification.